Today's daf is daf lamed dalid. We're going to start with the Gemara on daf lamed gimel amid beis, and the Mishnah says hechlifu, and it sounds like deliberately they violated the issur of Eishes Ish. So the Gemara says hechlifu midei b'rishoyim askinon. Is our Mishnah talking about rishoyim, that they deliberately had this escapade, this violation of Eishes Ish, visu? And furthermore, Tani Rabbi Chia, we have a brisa of Rabbi Chia, and he's qualifying our Mishnah, and he says, Harekan Sheshesrei Chatos, right? You have 4 people, each of which violated an issur of Eishes Ish, and also an issur of Achos Ishto. And therefore, there are all told 16 chatos. There were 4 people who violated each 4 isurim, actually. We're going to see that it's not only achos ishto, but it's also eishes ach. And then it's a nida. Ve'ibe mezid meika carbon. There's no carbon for a mezid. And therefore, it's obvious that he understood it. We're talking about a shogeg. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Tni, you should change the gears of the Mishnah. It shouldn't say ubeshas knisasam hechlifu, but rather huchlifu, and that's indicative of shogeg. Hachinam mistabra to katani seifa im hayu ktanos she'enam reuyus leiled machzirno son miyad. That when we straighten things out, we have to wait 3 months because of avchana, but not in the case of a katana because she's not ruya leiled. The iba mezid misharia. How could we even allow a woman to go back to her husband if there was a znus b'mezid? We have a din of sota, of vinitma, echad lebal, echad leboel. So the Gemara says the following: don't bring me any proofs from the Isa Lebal and the Isa Leboel that we're talking definitely about a case of shogeg. Lo kasha. It could be that we're talking about a case of mezid. However, since she's a kana, pita kana ones ninu, and therefore there's a case here of ones, and a woman does not become a surel baila in an HSC situation if it was ba'ones, ones b'Yisrael, mishra shari. In the parish of Sota, Bamidbar Hey and Naso, it says v'hilo nitfasa, which implies that there's only a din of nitma because lo nitfasa. Had it been nitfasa, had it been an ones, then she's mutaris l'baila. Ella dekatani mafrishin osan shlosha chadashim shema mu'ubaros heim. We have to delay returning the husband and wife together for 3 months so that we can be mavchid. Who is the father of this child? Halav mu'ubaros. Had they not been mu'ubaros, meaning if there was no problem of maybe she's mu'beres, shayan, we would allow them to go back to their husbands immediately. The ibimezid mishari ella shmamina huchlefu. So we have to change the girsa to indicate that we're talking about a shogeg, and that's called huchlefu. Now, we're going to prove from our Mishnah and the number of violations that you're chayav for, that our Mishnah maintains Isur Chalal Isur. And perhaps because it's an Isur Kolel or an Isur Mosif, or maybe both Isur Mechal B'Vasacha simultaneously. The Mishnah is talking about a case of 2 brothers that were married to 2 sisters, and each one had a relationship with his brother's wife, and she was a nida. And the Tana says that he chayav 4 chatos. Each one of the 4 people are chayav 4 chatos, total number 16 chatos. That's because of these 4 violations of Eishes Ish, Eishes Ach, Achos Isha, and Nida. Now, if we're going to say that Ein Iser Chal Iser, then how could it be possible that he be chayev atos for each one of these isurim? We're going to have to say Ein Iser Chal Iser. So the answer must be that our Mishnah maintains the sheet that under certain exceptional situations, and we'll see how that applies here, we will assume that Iser Chal Iser. For example, let's say Ruvain marries Rachel, and immediately Rachel becomes Asur al Shimon because of Eishes Ach. She's also an Eishes Ish. So now we have both Eishes Ish and Eishes Ach. And they're both Chal simultaneously. So that's called Shnei Yisur Vas Achal Biyachad Vasachas. So that's one issue. And we're going to say Iser Chal Iser B'Vasachas. Now, Shimon marries Leah, the sister of Rachel, who was the wife of Reuven. And now Rachel becomes Achos Ishto, as far as Shimon is concerned, because Shimon married Leah, her sister. Now, why would that be Chal? That's not B'Vasachas. That's in the subsequent marriage when Shimon marries Leah. And that's because it was called an Iser Kolel. Because now that Shimon, marries Leah, then what happens is that Nesru Olav Shara Achil Shel Leah Ishto. The other sisters of his wife Leah become Asuros. And they're not included in Eishes Ish. So Rachel is an Eishes Ish and Achos Ishto. But now, let's say Rachel and Leah have another sister called Rivka. She becomes Asura, Midin, Achos Ishto, at the moment that Shimon marries Leah. And that's called an Iser Mosef, when more people are included in the Iser. So that's called an Iser Kolel. Now, afterwards, Ruvain's wife, again, we're talking about Rachel in all these cases, she becomes a Nida. So she's Asur al Shimon with another Iser, which is number 4 on the list, and that's Nida. That's already an Iser Mosef. Because she becomes Asura Legabi Baila, meaning Ruvain, she was Mutereslo until this point. Now she's Asura on someone else, so we're extending again the Iser to apply to someone else, and that's called an Iser Mosef. Because now Ruvain himself is Asura al Ishto because she's in Nida. And therefore we're going to Aser her and Shimon, we didn't need it. That's an Iser Mosef. Now we had a machlokas on Daf Lamed Beis between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon about Iser Chal Iser. No one was of the opinion that Iser Chal Iser in all these 3 scenarios of Vasachas, Iser Mosef, and Iser Kolel, Man Haitana. So who is the author of Mishnah? To Islay, he holds Iser Chal Iser, Iser Kolel, Iser Mosef, Iser Vasachas. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Rav, Rabbi Meir. This is none other than Rabbi Meir. So this Uman Tana, which you'll see on the top of our daf for today, Daf Lamed Daled, is searching for a potential candidate author of our Mishnah who would hold that in all these 3 cases, we have the exceptional rule of Iser Chal Iser, Iser Kolel, Iser Mosef, Iser Vasachas. And Rabbi Yehuda, in the name of Shmuel, identifies our Mishnah as Rabbi Meir. And now we're going to try to see where we find that Rabbi Meir holds Iser Chal Iser in all these 3 cases. Tisnan, we have a Mishnah. This a Mishnah increases. Yesh ochel achila achas v'chayev aleh arba chatos v'yoshev echad. So he's going to violate 5 isurim simultaneously with 1 achila v'kezayis. 4 of them generate a chiyuv chatas, 1 a chiyuv asham. The asham has to do with what we call moel behegdish, and there's an asham be'ilos. So what's the case? Tameh, right? He has tumas aguf, sha'achal chelev, but not just regular chelev, but v'hu chelev min hamukdash, and it's also nosa, and it's Yom Kippur. So the Gemara in Krisus clarifies the meaning of this Mishnah. How could all these Isur be Chal? And from the beginning, there's an Isur Chelev, even when the animal is Chulin, it hasn't yet been designated as Hegdesh. But with the emergence of its physical body, there's an Isur Chelev B'Achila. Chelev is Mutamana. Then Nitma Adam, the person himself became Tameh. And now we're going to see that as a result of his Tumah, there's going to be another Isur. But again, in order to appreciate that, we have to make a transition from Chulin to Kodshim to Hegdesh. And we have now an Isur Kolel. Why? Because when he's Magdish, this animal, then not only is Chelev Asur, which was Asur even as Chulin, but now by virtue it's becoming Hegdesh, Basar Kodshim, now any Isur Achila of any segment of the body of the animal is included in this law. So we're going way beyond the Chelev, because by virtue of Hegdesh and also Kodshim, now all the parts of the animal are us. So that's called an Isur Kolel, right? When you expand the scope of the Isur to include other chafatzim, other macholos. Now, by virtue of the fact that he was Magdish the Behema, he generates an Isur Me'ilah. That's already an Isur Mosif. Because you really changed the Chefza di Surah itself. You started with Chelev, which is Mutabana. Now, as a result of Kodshim, you have an Isur Me'ilah, which changes the nature of the object. And you can measure it, if you will, by the fact that being Magdish the Chelev and engendering now a status of Kodshim, an Isur Hano emerges because of the new Shem Kodesh. And that generates Me'ilah. So that's certainly an Isur Mosif. Now, when he eats and violates the din me'ilah, he's chayv a korban asham. Now it becomes nosar. It becomes nosar. We again have an Isur Mosif because now the object becomes asur even for akrav al gabi mizbeach. Until that was only asur to the hedgehog. Now it becomes asur. Now top that off with the fact that it's Yom Kippur. And that's again an Isur Kolel, because not only are the parts of the animal also midin b'achil midin Yom Kippur, but every machala, every food, even if it's not chelev, etc., also us. The Gemara says that if we look at this brisa, Rabbi Meir Omer Hoisa Shabbos, Hotzio Befiv, Chaya. He's going to be chayav an additional korban chatas for Meleches Hotzah b'Shabbos. And why is it? Because by carrying something in his mouth from Rishus Rabin, Rishus Yachid, or Rishus Yachid, Rishus Rabin, he incurs a violation of Meleches Hotzah for which he has to bring a korban chatas. And even though usually we say Ein derech hotzah b'peh, you don't carry something with your mouth, but in a case of dvar machol, that's considered kedarka. It's kederech hotzah, and he's chayav achatos for violating the Shabbos. Now, what did he add by virtue of the fact that it's Shabbos? L'chora, if you're talking about the Isra Hotzah, that applies even on Yom Kippur. But the answer is we're holding now that Ein Isra Hotzah b'Yom Kippur. That Yom Kippur is like a Yontif. Just like Yontif doesn't generate Isra Hotzah, so too Yom Kippur does not. Amulo, the Chacham responded to Rabbi Meir, Eino min Hashem. So the Chacham was saying that you cannot add another chiyuv after Shabbos because we're talking about an Isra Achila. Here you're talking about introducing an Isra Hotzah. It happens to be that he violated the Hotzah through an Achila. So Rav Meir is of the opinion that if this Hotzah was violated through the Achila and he's mischayev al Shasa B'liya, because that's considered Hanocha for Meleches Hotzah. So then it makes sense that the Isra Achila here is included on this listing because it's all because of the Achila. He's chayev on the Shas B'liya because he needs Hanocha, right? You can't just carry and remove an object from Rishus to Rishus, so Ramash to Yochid, vice versa. But you have to add the Iser of Achila, which violates on Shabbos as such, per se, Achila per se. And this is based on B'Vasachas, because Yom HaKippurim and Shabbos are both Chal B'Vasachas, and we're holding that there's no Isra Hotzah in Yom HaKippurim, so it's only Shabbos that adds Isra Hotzah, and that makes it into an Isra. One second, I'm just trying to figure out if it's an Isra Polar or an Isra Mosif somehow. Forget about Isra Mosif, Isra Kol. My mistake. All you need is B'Vasachas. Because both Yom HaKippurim and Shabbos are Chal B'Vasach. Rabbi Meir. In our case, where the achios was switched, b'shas knisa l'chup, and he's chayv daled chatos. Gemara says this is called Torah b'dvar mitzvah. And he wanted to be mekayim the mitzvah of marrying a woman. I'll leave the man. I'll leave it Rabbi Yeshua ha'omar Torah b'dvar mitzvah potter. This is a brisa quoted in Shabbos Kufluk Zion. And this is machlok between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua. In the case of a Moel who has two babies in front of him, and one is a Milah of Erev Shabbos, and the other is a Milah of Shabbos, and mistakenly he did the Milah of Erev Shabbos on Shabbos, which probably been the 9th day of the baby since the baby's born, and he's potter. And both according to Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua, in that case, he's potter because clearly he is Torah b'dvar mitzvah. Now, what happens? This is going to be the machlokas Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua. If he has two babies to be mal, one is a Sunday baby, the other is a Shabbos baby, and instead he circumcised the Sunday baby on Shabbos. Rabbi Eliezer says he's chayv chatos. Rabbi Yeshua says he's potter. According to Rabbi Yeshua, he's potter because kol haTorah dvar mitzvah. He was involved in the mitzvah of Milah, and he thought he was circumcising on Shabbos the Milah bismana. He mistakenly circumcised the Milah of Sunday. And the chiddush of Rabbi Yeshua is, in fact, he wasn't mekayim the mitzvah at all. Because kodem zmano, that's not a mitzvah of Milah. But yet, Rabbi Yeshua says he's potter for chatas because his kavanah was to do a mitzvah. So therefore, the same thing should apply here in our Mishnah, where his kavanah was to do a mitzvah, and instead he ended up with his brother's wife. So in such a case, Rabbi Yeshua says you're potter, and our Mishnah is assuming you're chayav. Ela libid Rabbi Eliezer, who rejects this brisa, and he rejects Rabbi Yeshua in this brisa, I mean to say, and he also had Torah dvar mitzvah v'lo asa mitzvah, because again, he circumcised the Sunday baby on Shabbos, which is not a mitzvah at all, and therefore he's chayav. Here also, maybe he was Torah b'dvar mitzvah, but he didn't do any mitzvah at all, and therefore he's chayav. So our Mishnah can reflect the shita Rabbi Eliezer by saying another possibility. Olam, I'll leave it to Rabbi Yeshua. I'll leave it to Rabbi Yeshua. How is he chayav chatos? He's Torah b'dvar mitzvah. Ki kam Rabbi Yeshua Torah b'dvar mitzvah potter. Ani vili gavi tinokos. That he was mal on Shabbos, a tinokos that he should have postponed, and the milah will take place on Sunday. Dizmano bohu. I said, since it's a time urgent mitzvah, he's bohu. And therefore, he's not considered a classic shogig. He's Torah the mitzvah. He has a mitzvah milah, and he's so farnumit, he's so frachatted, obsessed with the mitzvah. That's why he made a mistake, and he circumcised the Sunday baby. Aval high, but in our Mishnah, when a man is involved in the mitzvah of Nesuin, and he went and had a relationship with the wrong woman, his brother's wife, even the Ains Mano Bohu, there's no time urgency in the Mishnah. It's not a mitzvah that has a Zman Kavua like Mila. So why did he rush the job so much? And he got so curried and he made such a major blunder, a catastrophic mistake. Lo Pacho Rabbi Yeshua Bechatos. Here he would be Chai Bechatos. Gemara says Kasha Barei Ochel Truma B'Shogeg Di Ein Zmano Bo. Right, there's no time urgency in the mitzvah Achilus Truma. Umi Kol Makom Kol Pater Rabbi Yeshua Sa Ochel Truma Shogeg Truma B'Shogeg. And he's Pater from Kemer V'Chomech. This nan, Hoya, we're talking about a Kohen, Ochel B'Truma, V'noda Shehu Ben Grusho Ben Chalutza, and he's a Cholol, and he's not allowed to eat Truma. He has the same status as a Zar. Rabbi Eliezer Mechayev Kerem V'Chomech. He's an Ochel Truma. Rabbi Yeshua Poter, because this person thought he was a Kohen kosher, so his kavanah was to fulfill the mitzvah Chilas Truma. And Rabbi Yeshua says he's potter, even though lo asa mitzvah, and even though there's no zman kavua, so he's not bowl the kindness of mitzvah. So the Gemara answers, "Ha'itmar Allah Rabbi Bar Abaye hacha b'truma chametz truma be'erev Pesach haskinon dizmana bahu." He's very pressured by the time urgency element. Because if he delays and he doesn't eat it, then it's going to have to be burnt at the time of Shreifas Chametz. And he's chayv in Mishmeres Trumosais, guarantee that there's no Hefsei Truma. So therefore, Rabbi Yeshua packers him up because he's considered a Toeh Didvar Mitzvah and Zmano Bohol. He's got to be shomer the truma, because if he waits until it's the time for streifa, that's going to be a severe violation of streifas truma. So he has to protect the truma from becoming chametz and tone streifa, and because of that tirda, it's considered like Zmano Bo. The Iboy Sema, possibly we don't have to interpret our Mishnah in terms of Isur Chalal Isur, but rather the Isur B'Vasachas. The focal point of our Mishnah, which indicates a Machlokas Tanoim, would be in a case of an Isur B'Vasachas. But I'll leave it to Reb Shimon. We quoted Reb Shimon on Daf Lamed Beis that we don't say Ein Isur Chal Isur if both Isurim emerge simultaneously B'Vasachas. So forget about Isur Mosif, Isur Kolel. Our Mishnah, from beginning to end, is talking about violating these multiple Isurim that were Chal B'Vasachas. So the Gemara says, Bishlem Akulu Michkachas Lahu. I can work it out that the Isur H's Ish, H's Ach, Achos Isha, all of those, barring neither, can be orchestrated in a V'Vasachas. How? Mishkachas Lahu Tishavinu Shliach. Vishavinu inu shliach. So both the Makadshim and the Miskadshos appointed a shliach, respectively. Poga shliach b'shaliach. So the shliach of the brothers meets the shliach of the sisters and gives them kiddushin, right? Each one. So niskadshu shtei achos v'shtei achim b'masachas. So the Isser of H's Ish and H's Ach will chal b'vasachas. Elenidos heichem mishkan. How you can get vasachas in the case of Nida? I mean, if she was pierced Nida before the Kedushin, then the Isur Nida came before the other Isur. And if she was pierced Nida after the Kedushin, then it's a question of Kedima. Meaning, which came first? She was pierced Nida after the Kedushin. So all those various Isurim and Arayas were chal before the Isur Nida. So how do you construct the Vasach with regard to Nida? Either she was pierced Nida before the Kedushin or after the Kedushin. Omar Rav Amram Omar Rav be shofas mitoch shloshas or liachar shloshas. So we're talking about the two brothers, and they were ketanim. They became gdolim and bari chiyuva in a situation of shofos dam nida. And so we toch shloshasar adli achar shloshasar. The nidus and the re'iyas hadam was shas. It continues uninterrupted from before the 13th birthday till after the 13th birthday. Well, it depends who we're talking about, whether it's the two sisters or the two brothers. So if you're talking about the two sisters, it's entering into the 13th year, which means her 12th birthday. And if you're talking about the two brothers, it's entering into their 13th birthday, into their 14th year, which is their 13th birthday. So basically, all four of them become Bari Mitzvah, or Benos Mitzvah, simultaneously. I guess we're talking about two twin boys married to two twin girls. That could be dangerous. And we talk so therefore, we have a case of Vasachas. So he gives an example here of Noldu Shnei Achim B'Echad B'Tishrei B'Shana Achas and Lashon Acheres B'Echad B'Tishrei Noldu Shtei Ha'Achios. So at the same day that both Achios became 12 years of age, the brothers became 13 years of age. And on that day, the two brothers married the two sisters, and there was a shvias dam of the Achos, of course, from the end of Yud Beis into the beginning of Yud Gimel. So when the Benos reached Gadlus at the beginning of Yud Gimel, that's the same time that the two brothers reached Gadlus at the beginning of Yud Dalet. So all four Isurim were Chal V'Vasachas. And all these Isurim depend upon Kedushin. So the Chalos Kedushin depends upon the Gadlus HaAchim and the Gadlus HaAchios. And there was an Isur Nida that was Chal immediately at the point of Gadlus. The Mishnah says that after the Be'ilah, Mafrichin Osam, we separate them from their respective marriage partners and spouse for a period of 3 months. We have a principle that a woman does not become pregnant from the first bia. And if that be the case, why do you require Shlosha Chadashim? This was a first bia. Omar Nachman Omar Abusha Bolu Vishanu. They had two Be'ilos. There might be a tumor, but that's as far as Isur, there's no Isur. The Elahod the Tanu Rabbi Chia, a Rekan Sheshis Rechatos. Right in the Brisa Rabbi Chia, he calculates 4 Isurim for each of the two brothers. This is all told for 16 Chatos. And now you told me Bol Vishanu. So we should double the number of Chatos and should be Talsim V'Tartanah. Be 32, not 16. So Gemara rejects this question. Even if I grant you that we're not talking about Bolu Vishanu, is Rabbi Eliezer Mechayv al Kof and Kof Tu V'Havyu. Rabbi Eliezer's sheet is that Yechayv Chatos on every bia and bia Behelim Achas. So Rabbi Chia takes this one step further, and he said, "El Yechayv bia, but Yechayv for each koach. Every koach has a hana unto itself, and it generates a chiyuv chatos. So we're going to talk about a lot more than 16 chatos, even if there was only one bia. We chayv a chatos, a separate chatos for each koach and koach. Ella to be koach rishon kochosh. Apparently, in calculating how many chatos, he's only interested right now. He's calculating the first koach. Kochanami, even if we'll say there are two bios, the bia rishon kochosh is only counting the first bia.